So today's topic, authentic leadership, how to lead with presence, not position, is the first of 8 mini sessions where David will be sharing leadership insights and offering a small sample of what you will experience at David's 3-day online Authentic Leadership Academy in April. In April's Academy, we'll be diving into this topic as well as several others in much greater depth. It promises to be a truly transformational experience. And as you listen to today's session, you may find that you feel called to join us for the Academy, where we would absolutely love to have you. Or perhaps you know someone that you currently lead, maybe someone who leads you, or just someone else that you care for that's eager to infuse new passion, power, and purpose into their leadership. When it comes to leadership and learning, the journey never ends. So thank you again for joining us this morning. It's always so exciting to see so many leaders that are committed to learning and growing and showing up as the best versions of themselves. So without further ado, here is David.
Thank you very much, Kristen, and thank you everybody for being here and for investing your time. I know there's many voices on our internet that are clamoring for our attention today, and for you to devote a half an hour of your day today means a great deal to me, believe me. So let's. I would ask you to just feel free to state in the chat where you're from, maybe where you work, and just connect with each other a little bit. And if you have any questions, Kristen will be taking a look at the chat and see if there's any questions. I'm going to speak right up until 9:30 here in Alberta. So I'll just talk for half an hour, and then we'll stick around I'll be sticking around if you want to stay on longer and we're able to, for questions and answers, but the formal presentation will end right on the half hour. The other thing I want to say is we've decided to put this onto our YouTube channel. So you will have access to the recording of this, and you can feel free to pass that around. And Kristen also, in a few minutes here, will be putting in the chat the link to our YouTube channel, as well as any of the resources that we have available. So with that in mind, let's get going here. I'm going to take you on a journey. For those of you who have worked with me before, know that I don't just give presentations, I take you on a journey. And so I want to do 3 things in our journey that we're going to embark on for the next half an hour here. It's a very short amount of time. I actually feel more anxiety speaking for half an hour than I do if we had a whole day together. So because I feel like I have so much material and I feel so called to get this out into the world. But I'm grateful to give you just a little bit of a taste of what we would do if we were together for 3 days. So first of all, I want to talk to you what I've learned about my parents, what I learned from my parents about leadership. Second thing, I want to explore this whole notion of authenticity. It's the foundation of my work, and the power of presence. What you'll learn here is that leadership has nothing to do with your title. It's not a position, it's your presence that makes everybody a leader. And then finally, we're going to talk about healing the divide in our world, the power of authenticity. I want to make this very real today, because I do find in our world, we're very divided. We're divided as a country. Many of our families are divided. Our workplaces are divided as we emerge through this pandemic. And I want to just give you a little bit of a map of how we might begin to heal that divide in our world and in our families and in our workplaces. So just a little bit about me. This is a bit of a cross section of some of the organizations. I've been in the leadership development field now for almost 40 years. And I've met some incredible leaders that I have learned from. Many of those leaders I know are on this call today. And I feel very blessed in my career and very fortunate to have had the opportunity. I think I've learned as much over my years as I have taught. And so what I want to share with you very much today is not so much coming from me, but coming from what I have learned from some of these incredible leaders and some of these incredible organizations. But I'm going to start by talking about what I learned from my parents. We all lead by default the way we were parented. If you lead today better than the way that you were parented, it only really means one thing, and that's that you've worked on yourself. But our parents are fundamental in terms of beginning those early learnings in our foundational years around what we learned about leadership. And so I'm just going to very briefly start off what I learned from my parents. I'll tell you what I learned from my mother is I learned about independence. My mother was on a horse that you can see there at the age of 18 months. She rode her horse actually to school 6 miles. It wasn't uphill both ways. I know I checked that, but She did ride her horse 6 miles across a railroad track to a one-room school. And I'll tell you, there wasn't 1 ounce of entitlement in my mom's bones. This is the little shack that she was raised in, just outside of Lethbridge here in southern Alberta. 10 kids were raised in this shack. I have to, when I talk about accountability in organizations today and talk about raising accountable kids, I always say, if you want to raise accountable kids, poverty really helps. So although it's not necessary, but she taught me a few things that were very powerful. First of all, there wasn't an ounce of entitlement in her bones. My mother lived through 4 pandemics, lost 2 siblings in her upbringing in those pandemics. And I think my mother would, back in those days, you just died. There wasn't a world-class healthcare system that we needed to protect and uphold. People just died. I think my mother would today say we're a little spoiled. She would always say, let's make sure that every right is accompanied with an obligation, so that there's this balance between rights and responsibilities in life. And she would preach that often in my life and instilled in me very deeply. The other thing she instilled in me is the power of gratitude. She spoke for years about, always reminding me that I can still hear her voice, reminding me, always make your gratitude bigger than your circumstances. She just always felt grateful for everything. During the war years, she had a child. Her husband was off the war, but when he came up on leave, my mom, anyway, I won't go down that road, but my mom had a child in 1942, my stepsister. And my mother lived in Calgary at the time, but when her husband was on leave, she would go back and forth 11 times across the country on a train in the war years. Between Halifax and Calgary 11 times. And she was, I can imagine being in love. She was newly married. The birth of this child came and she took her baby across the country with her on this train. And her husband never made it home from the war. And so I was born in the midst of a family. She met my dad shortly after the war, and I was born into this family, and I was very grateful for what these upbringings. I want to talk about my dad, who was get very emotional about this because I feel so grateful for my parents and what they gave me and the foundation they gave me. My dad was the Canadian gymnastics champion back in the 40s. He used to walk around the house on his hands when he was 50 years old. But it's interesting. I actually went through polio when I was 4. I was under an oxygen tent for 2 weeks. I had no contact with adults except the nurses would come in with their masks. And I just remember this, very unsettling, very insecure time. And they would come in and feed me and through the oxygen tent. My parents had no contact with me. I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks. It felt like forever. And I suffer from some anxiety attachment disorder that I've had to work with all of my life. And I think in part, this was a big part of it, that this was a very traumatic experience for me at a very young age. And I came out of that and my dad worked with me. This is my favorite picture of my father's on top of a mountain just outside of Banff, just not far from where we live here. But my dad would take me downstairs into the gym. He had parallel bars in the basement and a tumbling mat. And he always taught me, he would taught me to strengthen myself every day. And, he would say, nobody's going to feel sorry for you. You're not going to be labeled as a polio survivor. We're going to get you stronger every day. He always say, don't pray for the world. Don't pray for the world to get easier. Pray for you to get stronger. And we'd get down in the basement every day and he'd work on my strength. And I can still, to this day, I can close my eyes and I can still smell my father. I can still smell his armpits, and I can feel the strength of his shoulder muscles and his biceps and his thighs, my muscles, as I was climbing up on his shoulders on these parallel bars as he would work with my strength. And he taught me something very important in my life. Number one, that ability matters, but our inner qualities matter more, who we are as a person. He was the kind of person that when you went to the hardware store, it was never a 5-minute visit. It was never a 5-minute check-in. It was a half an hour visit that he would have with the cashier. He would talk to the cashier. He would help make her day. He would just talk to everybody. And it was just an open heart that he had we took our garbage to the dump. There was an old guy that lived at the dump that used to smell, and he'd visit him and bring a pot of hot chocolate out there. Monty was his name, and he lived on what everybody else dropped off. And I could never figure out why my dad would spend time doing that. And when my parents sold their farm, Monty rode his old bike 10 miles to shake my dad's hand. I think my dad was probably his only friend. And that was the kind of person that my dad was. He also worked for the city of Red Deer, advocating for the poor and the marginalized. And I could never figure out what my dad did for a living. And I remember going to city council with him once in the 60s. I was probably 12 years old. And he was advocating to get money for the poor in his community and the marginalized in his community. And one of these old redneck city council members was pounding his fist on the desk and saying, why can't these people pick themselves up by their own bootstraps? And my dad, with tears in his eyes, stood in front of him and said, with all due respect, sir, what if they don't have any boots? So that was the kind of my parents that I was raised with, and very, very blessed. I won't tell you all the dark side of my family. I know that my dad also suffered from mental illness and from some mental health challenges. But nonetheless, I was blessed. And I think it does us well to all get to a point where we can be grateful for the way we were raised. Even though we may not have gotten everything we wanted, we got everything that we needed. And out of that emerging family, what I came up with was my own personal mission, which is to help create a more fully human world by living and leading the authentic way. This is what I'm passionate about. This is not a job for me. This is my life's work, folks. And I'm grateful that you can be a part of it today. So what is this thing called authenticity? What do we mean by the authentic way? My colleague, Dr. David Lertzman, who was a university professor at the School of Business in Calgary, a beautiful, beautiful human being who impacted many, many people. And for anybody who would like to learn about the impact of a teacher in the lives of their students and the community that he served, just Google his name and find out the accolades that were given to him and the recognition that was given to him. He was a true outdoorsman, and ironically and tragically, he was killed in an encounter with a grizzly bear last year. But he said this about authenticity: authentic leadership hinges on the insight that who you are as a person is your most valuable contribution. The more present you can be for yourself, and the more at peace you can be with yourself in any given moment, the more able you are to be of service to other people. This is what we truly mean by authenticity. You see, folks, how many of you have been taught this? You got to think outside the box. Well, here's my premise, and here's the notion of authenticity, is to ask yourself this question: how'd you get into the box in the first place? You see, if you live in a box, then you got to tell people to get out of the box. But you know, my vision would be that we create an organization so authentic that we live outside the box. And we don't have to tell people to think outside the box, because they're going to be thinking outside the box because that's where they live. So if you find yourself thinking, how do I think outside the box? Just ask yourself that question. How'd you get in the box in the first place? You see, authenticity, and this is just really an excuse to introduce you to my grandson. Authenticity is residing in your own true nature. When we're born, folks, we're born authentic. If you come from a spiritual or a faith-based, you can call this your spiritual stewardship. This is your spiritual birthright, that we come in whole, that we come in with a destiny, a seed of possibilities. Just like an acorn seed is born to one day be a giant oak, we are all born with a destiny, but we grow up in this world that tells us how we should be. And so we spend our lives conforming. The authenticity has taken a very bad rap today, because people walk around acting like a jerk and saying, well, that's just my authentic self. But folks, none of us are born jerks. We're born authentic, but we learn to be a jerk in order to survive. So that's not, be careful when you begin to say, that is my authentic self. Your authentic self is the essence of who you are. And for anybody that's a parent here that's had more than one child, or an aunt or an uncle that has more than one niece or a nephew, you understand right from day one, children have their own essence right from birth. They have their own essence and their own temperament and their own personality. So this is me in the back row here. And I know my essence, the essence of who I am, is this is where I was the most alive. And if you go back in your life, when you were the most alive and the most engaged in life, where time didn't matter, then you know you've connected with your authentic self. And this is for the first 5 years of my life. This was my authentic self. I was born to work at the heart level. My sister gave me all of her dolls when she left home. I totally was engrossed in these dolls. This was my purpose in life. This was my path in life. I've taught university for 3 years, and I never really I never fit into that system, because I'm not, I love, I love the impact of research and academia, but I'm not an academic. I'm a relational guy, and I didn't survive very well in a very highly intelligent system, a highly, in that kind of an environment. And so I have to really understand myself. But for the first 5 years of my life, this is what I was really, truly authentic until grade 1. And what I did was I took all my dolls to school for show and tell. I brought myself to school, and it was the first experience. If you can imagine a boy bringing all his dolls in 1962 in central Alberta to school. It was my first experience, folks, in being humiliated. It was the first experience that I had in recognizing that my authentic self isn't always valued and appreciated in the world. And so what I did with those dolls, only an idiot is going to take them back to school and keep showing them off. I didn't have the wherewithal and the courage to say, that's not my problem. You guys just have your own hangups. I'm going to honor my own authentic voice. I didn't have the wherewithal to say that. So what I did is I came home, put my dolls in a box, and locked them up for 20 years. Never looked at them again until my parents sold the farm back when I was in my early 20s, and I found those old dolls. And so and I believe during those 20 years, I got very depressed because I suppressed who I was. I was trying to fit in. I was trying to be tough. I was trying to be, I played all kinds of sports, trying to be the tough guy. I played high school football. I couldn't run or catch or throw, but I wanted to fit in, and I want to be a part of the crowd, and I wanted to conform. And it was probably good for me to fit in, but I really suppressed who I was as a person. And so I've struggled with this notion of authenticity. And I've learned over the years that which you're most capable of teaching is what you're most in need of developing. So it's been my own authentic journey along this path. But here's what I've learned, that there lies within every person. When we get connected to it, we feel deeply and intensely alive, this place inside of us where we feel deeply and intensely alive. And at such moments, there's a quiet voice inside that says, this is the real me. And so when we can connect with the real me, and my vision is that we create workplaces and families where people are connected to their authentic self. You'll never have to motivate anybody for the rest of your life if you connect people to their authentic self, but it starts by connecting with your own authentic self. This is where we truly make the most difference in the world. Now, I've come up with a little list here. You can come up with your own list. How do you know when what does it feel like to be authentic? What does it feel like to be inauthentic? What it feels like to be inauthentic is exhausted and guarded and polite. I'm not saying we shouldn't be polite. We're Canadians after all. But the opposite of engagement, folks, is not disengagement. The opposite of engagement is we just act politely to each other. It might be a necessary, sufficient, it might be a necessary component to building a great culture, but it's certainly not sufficient. We don't want people holding back and pretending, resistant, disconnected, entitled, stressed, and empty, versus an authentic response, which is energized, honest, genuine. You're in the flow, you're connected, you're grateful, you're at peace with yourself, and you're fulfilled. But you got to really listen to your own inner heart. You got to listen to this compass within yourself. I remember, we all have defining moments that bring us inviting us into our authenticity. If we'll stop and pay attention to those defining moments. I can tell you one of my defining moments. We spent in my own life, we spent the 1990s. I wrote a book on accountability, and I traveled around the country offering companies this process for accountability. And my defining moment was when I was in Toronto, and I was asked by a bank, one of the top banks in Toronto, if I would pitch my proposal to build accountability within their system. Now, I got to tell you, I'm sitting in front of the top 25 leaders of this bank. 24 of them were in black or gray three-piece suits, one woman in the room. And they could care less about people. They wanted to buy my system so that they could build accountability in their organization and their company so that they could make more money. They had no concern for people. They had no concern for culture. They just simply wanted to strictly make more money. And I sat there sick to my stomach. And here I was, it was a very lucrative offer that I could have taken. And I walked away and I said, I can't sell my soul to this organization. And it was at that point that I said, I have to integrate authenticity into this work of accountability. If I can't talk about the heart, if I can't bring a relational component in, I can't work here. I just can't fit here. You see, my whole notion of the other Everest is that we spend our life growing up, and growing up is a good thing to do. We all know that the highest point on the planet is Mount Everest at more than 8,000 meters above sea level. What's less known is that the deepest point on the planet is in the Mariana Trench at more than 8,000 meters below sea level. It's virtually an inverted Everest. And so what we all do is that we're told to grow up. What are you going to do when you grow up? But then we reach a point in our life where we grow down. And my notion is that growing down, coming to grips with the deepest part of the realities of ourself, connecting with that deeper authentic self is just as valid, if perhaps not more valid, than the journey upwards. So at some point in our life, we reach this point where we begin to ask ourselves what drives our life. And it could be a defining moment that puts this shift there. It could be a quiet night where we begin to really reflect. It could be the dark night of a soul while we're sitting, lying in bed, looking up at a dark ceiling, but we begin to say, what's driving my life? And for the first half of our life, we're driven by these devices, appointments and schedules and goals and productivities and activities and achievements. This is the journey upward. But then we get to a point where we say, you know what I really want to have guided my life is not what society wants from me. What I want is something inner. And we don't learn very well how to connect with that inner compass. We're much more apt to be taught what the world expects from us, how to be accountable to the world instead of listening to ourselves and being accountable to our own soul. And this is not narcissistic journey. That's self-centeredness. That's not connecting with your authentic self. Your authentic self will always move toward making a contribution in the world. But we begin to move into this area where we say, what are our values, dreams, passion, purpose, contribution, and meaning in our life? I want to end, folks, with this little slide, because I want to talk about how to build unity in this world of divisiveness. And I want to bring all of this theory that I have just spent the last 20 minutes outlining here. I want to make it very real for our world right now and say, what is the power of authenticity? And how can authenticity help unite us and bridge these barriers and gaps that we have found between us? And so at this moment, I would just ask you to do a little check-in. What it means to be authentic is to stop and get your bearings and to know what season you're in any particular moment. And I want to say there's no bad season. We live in Canada here, and I can tell you that there's no bad season in Canada. There's little rough seasons, but there's no bad seasons. It's just what it is. It's okay to not be okay today. And as leaders, what we often say is we want to help people move. We feel this responsibility as we move into a position of leadership. We want to help them move into these upper seasons. We want to get them renewed. We want to get them focused. We want to be purposeful. We want to help them find their passion. But folks, if you don't honor the below seasons, it won't be real. It'll just be a superficial cheerleading session. It's like giving a motivational speech at a funeral. Hey, this is a great opportunity here. Well, it might be a good message, but the timing sucks. People have to grieve first before they build. And we are not a culture that honors these below the seasons, this downward journey, this journey within. We always want to grow up. But what about growing down? I'm not saying it's wrong to grow up. The journey to the Everest is an important journey, to be challenged to take it up. But what about going down? So the disrupted, I don't know anybody on this planet in the last 2 years who has not felt fear and loss and loneliness and self-doubt. What have we done with our fears, our losses, our loneliness? What are we doing with that? Now, if we don't stop and be with those, if we don't acknowledge them, if we don't authentically face those, what happens is that they go into anger and we feel irritable. We get into rage. We get into divisiveness. We divide. And this is exactly what's going on in our world today. As we say in the trauma literature, violence is what happens when we don't know what to do with our suffering. What are we doing? I have felt an enormous sense of loss. So I'm just going to focus and by the way, then we can get, there's a whole strategy that I would offer you around the depletion side. But the first step is to accept and acknowledge where we are, including if we find ourselves feeling angry. And then, by the way, if we take that anger and hold it inside, that's where depression is born. And so what happens is having to face the depression in my own life, I understand a little bit of what this is like. And I understand a little bit about my own journey through this. I have lost 2 colleagues in the last 2 years to suicide. This is a serious issue that we're dealing with today, mental health challenges. But instead of pathologizing it, making it wrong, let's accept that we're here. So let me just talk very briefly about losses. What losses have you gone through? And what are you doing on your teams to help people just be with their losses? We always want to move to the lighter side and say, oh yeah, it's a great opportunity here. Yes, but before we get there, we want to make sure that we have we honor the losses. Here's a list of some of the losses that I've dealt with and that I have known that people in my life have dealt with these last 2 years. Hugs. And by the way, we're not used to dealing with losses. We have a society that believes that we should have, a right to not have any losses. We should have a right to everything that we want in life, and that we want everything, we should get everything that we want. And it's not leading us to a place of wellness. Here's some of the losses that I've experienced. I'm a hugs and handshake guy. I've lost that these last years. I'm very excited to get back to that, but people are going to be cautious. When do I shake person's hand? When do I hug people? There's that loss of spontaneity. I can't just plan a holiday. We can't just go where we want to go. There's other considerations. There's society as a large that we have to be aware of. We've lost loved ones during these 2 years, and we've lost the rituals of being able to support each other and hold each other during those losses. This is a challenging time, but let's accept that we're here. Yes, we've lost some freedoms. We've had to give up some of our freedoms for the sake of the greater good, but we're not used to giving up our freedoms. We're used to saying we're entitled to these freedoms without any sense of responsibility. So if we can begin to look at what's underneath the anger, maybe we can begin to unite and come together. Some of us have lost our health. Even this Omicron, those of us who have gotten it, there's kind of a residual effect with it. It lasts for a while. This is, yes, we're going to get through this, but it's good to acknowledge this, because if you look at your passion comes from the Latin root pati, meaning suffering or enduring. If you want to access your passion in life, then it comes often through the doorway of pain and suffering and loss. So I just want to give you this one little notion before I end up here, and that is the healing circle. Do this with your teams. Sit and tell that everybody's got a story for the last 2 years. What emotions have risen? What losses have we experienced? And how will we build a great future that will align the needs of this organization with the needs of the soul? Let's negotiate that. Yes, we got to be more flexible today. Thank goodness we're going to be more flexible, but we can't just meet all the employees' needs, but we can't just any longer just sell our soul to the organization. We got to work together at making that real and coming together with that. So on that note, I'll just mention this virtual Authentic Academy. Kristen will have all of the links in the chat room to stay in touch. And this is the curriculum for the Academy. And it's also the curriculum of how I'm going to be here every Friday morning for the next 8 weeks. And this is the curriculum. And we're going to make this available on my YouTube station, but on our YouTube channel. But this is I'll be just kind of giving you a taste of each of these topics that we get into in much more detail in the 2.5 days. So on that note, I'm going to stop the recording. We're going to come together. I know many of you just scheduled a half an hour, and you feel free to get off and get on with your life. But for those of you who want to hang around for a few minutes and have some Q&A and some discussion, I'll be available to do that.